This is the Motherlands podcast. The intention of this podcast is to provide evidence-based information related to fertility, pregnancy, childbirth, and postpartum, as well as share positive birth stories. I am your host, Keely Semler. The podcast you're about to hear is all about moving the body with integrity and intention. I sat down with Pilates teacher and studio owner Justine Malick of Sapphire Pilates to discuss how pregnant and postpartum people can build more inner awareness within their changing bodies. I am here in the beautiful space called Sapphire Pilates in Silver Lake with Justine Malick, the owner and founder of Sapphire Pilates. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I thought it would be really interesting to talk to you today about your new space, what sort of clients come through your doors, what your philosophy is on your teaching. Maybe you could start there.
Yeah, let's start there. Let's start with the name. So sapphire, the stone, the gem, represents many different things, including wisdom, intuition, clarity. And the word that really stuck out for me was wisdom. And so the invitation of the space is to connect to the wisdom of the body. And so my background in movement is rooted in Pilates and in yoga, but also in somatics and embodiment. And I've studied so many different modalities. And so this idea of connecting to this intrinsic innate knowledge that exists within all of us has had a profound impact on my own life, on my own body, on my teaching. And so I try to infuse my teaching and my sessions, my classes, with this sense of connection to, the greater act that we are doing. So we're more than just moving our bodies. We are, processing whatever else is going on in our life. Maybe we're helping ourselves sleep better. Maybe we're helping ourselves digest conversations or food or whatever. But movement is this incredible tool. And that was a huge inspiration for the space. It's been a couple months. It's really new. And so the format, the structure of the studio is that we have mainly private sessions and duets. And then also we have semi-private classes, which are 3 to 4 people. And then there's mat classes. So those are the main offerings. And then there's also some workshops, Ayurveda, and with my mom. And then there's teacher trainings. So those are kind of our main offerings. But with the group classes, what I love about them is that with 3 to 4 people, you can really get into the nuance and the detail of the work while still being in a group environment. And so a few of those classes are called Nourish classes. They're open to everyone, but those are the ones that I've specifically designated for prenatal and postpartum women. But at the same time, anyone's welcome to come. And the idea is that you can move and have a Pilates practice that is nourishing and grounding, but also strengthening. The periods of time, as you know, of pregnancy and after birth are so potent and there's so much change happening. And so we really target the different places in the physical body that offer the most support. And as a result of that, we're engaging with different parts of the self and the life that are of the person, that are non-physical as well.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I do want to get into how you support people in pregnancy and postpartum. I'm super curious, as a doula and as a female health educator, childbirth educator, there's a tendency from my clients to always ask me, how can I strengthen my body for childbirth? And I find myself in this cycle of telling them it's not necessarily about strengthening right now. It's more about softening and engaging and locating some of these muscles and ligaments that you will need to use for your birth experience. But can you speak a little bit about how you support, let's start with pregnant women and how you teach classes, your Nourish classes.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I think the word that stood out for me when you said softening is super important. I think birth is an experience that requires strength. We absolutely want to feel strong. That said, if we look at something like the pelvic floor, not only do we want the pelvic floor to be strong, we want it to be soft enough so that it can expand. So breath is a huge focus whenever I'm teaching a private session with someone who's pregnant, or if I'm teaching the group class, the nourish classes. My friend Jacqueline says that breath work is core work, and I really infuse the sessions with that principle. And so what does that look like, right? It's like when you inhale, the breath travels down. Breath comes in through your nose and it goes down. When you exhale, it travels up and then out. So if you're breathing in and out through your nose, we want the inhale to fill the lungs, press the diaphragm down, fill the entire abdomen, the belly, the sides, the low back, all the way down into the pelvic floor. So the pelvic floor is expanding. And then on the exhale, the pelvic floor contracts, it lifts, and it goes back up. And then the breath leaves your body, right? Like through your nose. So this practice the strength of the breath and like the relationship to the breath can be taken from just like a seated breath practice or laying down. Laying on your side is a great place to start. Like you could let's say if you're laying on your right side, you put your left hand on your left waist, like right in between your ribs and your pelvis, 4 fingers in the front of your body, thumb in the back. That way you can feel the back of the body, the side of the body, and the front all at once.
And you're putting it on the ribs?
A little bit below the ribs. So if you think about the diaphragm beneath your rib cage and then your pelvic floor, which is also a diaphragm, as this container, like an abdominal container, canister, you want that whole abdominal canister between the diaphragm and the pelvic floor to be expanding on the inhale. And then on the exhale, it draws in and the breath travels up and out. When I'm teaching a session or a class, we'll start there. We start with the breath work. Then moving forward more into like physical movement, we really want to be engaging the back of the body. In Chinese medicine, they say that the front body is the yin, the back body is the yang. The yin is the tender, the soft, our face, chest, belly, organs of sexuality. Everything that's sensitive is in the front. Everything that is strong is the yang in the back. Back muscles, our glutes, our hamstrings, the back of our legs, right? Strong, robust, they can take a lot more. We want those muscles in the back to be like this strength that we can lean back into the strength of our own body. So if you think about what we're preparing for, right, in terms of birth, let's say even like breastfeeding, a lot of women will lean forward. Those muscles in the front will get tight, tense in the neck, right? If the upper back muscles are strong, right? So it's not a problem to lean forward, right? We want to have the strength in the muscles and in the body that if we go into these uncomfortable positions, like if you are like one feed, you just like are in an awkward position and you don't want to move because the baby's happy, to have the strength to then come out of that position and not feel like, oh, my neck is tweaked for the rest of the day. Right. Like, and then having movement tools that you can like release them. That's obviously in the postpartum situation, but in a pregnant situation, when we're dealing with someone who's pregnant, I'm focusing on the mother's back body quite a bit, like strengthening the upper back, strengthening her glutes, outer hips. We want that pelvis to feel stable. How much is happening in the body, right? How much expansion is happening in the pelvis to make space for the baby, but also as the belly grows, right? Everything is just feeling less stable. There's so much more relaxant in the system. All these things, we want to create a support.
Do you want to share with the listeners what relaxant does for the body?
In a sense that like it just makes it more flexible. And like, so and same thing on your period, right?
Yeah.
Like you, as someone who is quite mobile, it is, and like, there's so many people in the world who are like, oh, I wish I was flexible, blah, blah, blah. But actually, if we were to compare the two, strength and flexibility, they're on a spectrum. If you think of it like on a spectrum, strength is just so much more important, right? Without strength, we can't stand up straight. So if you have something like relaxant in your system, then it's just making things even more challenging just to stand up straight, to keep the pelvis from tipping forward too much so you're in a anterior pelvic tilt. For preventing, we don't want the hip flexors, those are those muscles in the front of the hip, to be stabilizers, right? Those are mobilizers. They help us move, right? Instead, we want the glutes to be really strong. We want the pelvis to feel supported from below, but also from above. We want strong back muscles. We want strong abdominal muscles. Now, as the belly expands, right, we don't want strong rectus abdominal muscles. For women who over-engage those rectus, that's a recipe for disaster, potentially.
Yeah. So it's interesting we're talking about this because I have noticed when I support clients in childbirth, there is a tendency to clench their bottom in active labor. And I have to tell people, are you clenching? Because you are signaling to the baby, don't come. Yeah. If you're clenching your bottom, you're clenching your pelvic floor, or you're tightening in general because you're trying to resist all of the sensation you're feeling, it's sort of an uphill battle for your body and your baby. So how do you encourage your clients to engage the pelvic floor, but also soften the pelvic floor and soften their seat and not be so tense or tight?
Yeah. One thing that I find super helpful is learning how to engage the inner thighs properly. If you, let's say, put a squishy ball between your knees and you hug in on that ball, you hug your inner thighs together, try to pop the ball, there's no way to clench the glutes. They can't, right? If you're in internal rotation, you can't clench your glutes. It's just, once you understand some of the mechanics of how the anatomical mechanics of how they function in the body, you start to see little pathways and patterns of like, oh, I see they're clenching too much with their glutes. Let me give them something, obviously in a Pilates context, bringing the knees together in a birth context.
No, actually, that's brilliant that you're saying that, because, and I think we've talked about this before, just the way that I've learned anatomy with the pelvis. You have the pelvic inlet, which is at the top of the pelvis when the baby starts to engage in the pelvis in early and active labor. And then the pelvic outlet is at the bottom of the pelvis going on their way down through the birth canal. And when it's time to push, when you turn your knees inward, you create more space in the outlet. So all of this is making sense because the same concept, if you've got a squishy ball in between your knees, you're not putting any tension on the outlet, right?
Yeah. It makes sense, right? So I do a lot of side lying work with clients, both for arm work, laying on their side, and it's so brilliant working with the Pilates equipment because the springs provide so much resistance, and you can customize it if someone needs less or more. But I've, in recent years, I'd say even just the last 3 to 4 years, been focusing a lot more on incorporating internal rotation because it's something, as someone who has practiced so much yoga and Pilates, it's just not inherent in these practices. We are constantly doing things like, if we go back even, 15 years, like everyone wanted to be in lotus position, right? Like that is such a deeply externally rotated position that's really not appropriate for a huge swath of the population. Like most people probably don't need to be in forcing their knees and their hips into lotus. That said, a lot of us feel good when we do hip openers. I think hip openers, things like pigeon or like a double pigeon kind of thing, sitting cross-legged with your shins, those can feel really good. But we want to be able to go both directions. If you go external, you want to be able to go internal. And it's a place that a lot of people, pregnant or not, people just don't bring attention.
Well, it's funny you say this because I find that when my clients come to me when they're pregnant, they've spent all of their life sucking in.
Yeah.
What does that do
totally
on the body and the baby when we need to soften and expand? So it's interesting because I find, yes, you need both, but I think women tend to lean more towards that sucking in and tucking in so much that how does that impact our bodies long term? I mean, surely it does.
How does that impact our breath, right? If you're constantly sucking in because you want your jeans to fit or you just want your stomach to look flat, right? And like bodies aren't flat. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that is not only impacting the breath pattern, but there's so many psychological impacts of that are subconscious sometimes. I mean, sometimes people are pretty aware of it, but there's a couple of things I see. I mean, like clenching glutes, huge thing, especially postpartum. I think when things feel pretty unstable postpartum, the tendency is to get support from wherever you can, right? Like the body is really intelligent in that regard. It's like, I'm going to help. These muscles are big. I'm going to help. Even if, so we want the other muscles, we need to strengthen the other muscles too, so that it's not just like the glutes that are clenching you and putting you into slight external rotation. So really working with neutral in the spine is huge. And glute clenching can also impact something like a diastasis. So if someone has weaker abdominals from birth or there is a tearing, thinning, learning how the pelvis and the rib cage and how that relationship is so impactful. I mean, glute clenching is one thing, but then another thing I see is upper abdominal gripping, where, it's like,
which is what we call coning.
Coning, totally. And so, and this is something that I see even with people who are not pregnant. There's this feeling of tension sometimes in the shoulders and neck, and they're not sure where it's coming from. And then, sometimes I'll have people, I'll like feel their abdomen, or they'll have like a shirt on that I can see their abs, and they're like really toned abs, especially in the upper part. And they're like, no, I don't work out. And it's like, well, how does that happen when someone has like defined abs? Well, because they're always engaged and they can't breathe fully because it's so tight. So something like skin rolling, like learning how to manipulate the skin with your hands so you can just release some of that scar tissue, release some of that fascia that's so bound, and you can't take a full breath. The thing about the body is that these patterns develop for a reason, right? They're doing, the body's doing something to protect you, to give you a sense of standing up straight as best it can. And if that, whatever, it's a coping mechanism, right? So similarly, if we have developed a coping mechanism, whether it's, disassociation or anger, this is in, more psychological terms, then we need to repattern, right? So that's what we're doing in a Pilates context. We're teaching the body, here's another way, right? Like, oh, here, let me teach you how to breathe well so you can engage your abdominals, like your deep obliques, your deep transverse abdominals. And this is just a different way to create that support that you were looking for. And so that, I always think of it like a white knuckling, that gripping. That's never anything we need ever.
Well, and the white knuckling often is an indication that people psychologically are trying to control or hold on to something. Totally. So you, going back to what you said about the spine, I know that this is a very common ailment in pregnancy, which is sciatic pain. So can you talk a little bit about what are some practical ways pregnant people can approach sciatica pain?
Yeah. The most acute form of sciatic pain that I've worked with was with a client I've worked with for a long time, her dear friend. And this was early COVID, and she was in a lot of pain, and I got a text from my client who was like, hey, how far along in a pregnancy are you comfortable working with someone? I was like, what do you mean? Like anything? She's like, well, she's in early labor. And I was like, okay. She's like, well, she's in a lot of pain. So we ended up doing a Zoom session, and the big thing is, one, get a wedge or like make a pillow mound and lay on your back on this supported incline. So you're not, putting any pressure on the vena cava, but stretching. There's 3 hamstrings behind each of the legs. So there's a central one, there's an outer one, and an inner one. The hamstrings are super impactful. We want them to be strong. We also need them to not be super tight. So that's usually a place that I'll start and kind of see, can they go in those 3 directions? So what does that look like? It's like laying on this wedge, and there's other ways to stretch the hamstrings that are not supine if you'd rather just not lay down. But basically have like a strap, yoga strap, or a belt, or if you have a magic circle, you can put that around your foot. You hold, let's say your right foot goes in the ring or the strap, and you hold it with your hands and you pull down. While you're pushing up with your heel, you're opposing it and tipping down with your tailbone.
Can you do that on your side? Because I'm just thinking about people that are pregnant and laying supine is not.
Right, which is why the wedge would be there, right? So like making a pillow mount. So in Pilates, we have what's called a wedge pillow. I'm sure it exists in other modalities as well, so that you're not fully supine, you're in this incline, which makes it a lot safer and still comfortable. You can do this kneeling, like standing could work too. You just would need something for balance, but you're pulling down, or if you're standing, you're flexing the foot and kicking down. So like if you were standing, let's say you were by your bed, you'd have one hand on like the bed frame, and you can put your right leg on the top of the bed, and you would lean just slightly forward. Obviously there's a belly there, so you want to be careful. You're not squishing the belly, but forward in the center. That one would be tricky standing just because of the belly, but then you would do the medial hamstring, which is the innermost one. So you would take the right foot a little bit to the right, and then you would lean forward. The central hamstring that I was talking about first deals with like the knee the most. The innermost hamstring deals with foot and ankle. And then the last hamstring, which you'll take the right leg slightly across the midline to the left, just slightly, is a little bit on the IT band. And this is similar. That's lateral hamstring, outermost hamstring, and the IT band area. And so this is where the sciatic pain generally goes down. So we're trying to create a spaciousness across that pathway so that if the nerve is being pinched, we can start to create a little bit of spaciousness. Other work that we can do that I do really enjoy, side-lying work, is to strengthen the outer hips and glutes. And that kind of thing. Also, we're bringing blood flow to the region. We're engaging the muscle so it doesn't feel like it's just so compressed, right? And so the more we can strengthen the muscles around the sciatica area, like the whole like SI joint, the better, you know? So, and the other thing, you have to take a look at a lot of other things. They might be overcompensating in their hip flexors, you know, and be really tight in their psoas or something like that. But I have found that the sideline work and addressing the hamstrings has been impactful.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Have you ever had a client who's pregnant come to you and say, oh, you know, my doctor or my midwife says that the baby's in an unfavorable position, like breech or transverse. Have you had that happen?
You know, I have. And I think one thing that's important with, like, I'm a Pilates teacher and I've studied a lot of things. My scope of practice, you know, and I've studied perinatal work, and I don't have the training to really address that specifically. So I try to work with the doula, or like if there's certain movements that the doula or the midwife recommends, I will incorporate them. We
really got to do something together, because I feel like
I know, it would be so great.
So much of this overlaps because, for example, if someone's baby is breech, doing some what's called pelvic rocking or pelvic tilting or cat-cow can make a world of difference and create more space.
And we do those things in all of the sessions. So I think what's beautiful about a practice like Pilates, especially if it's prenatal focused in this situation, if you are engaging with the body holistically, like if you're approaching it holistically and I'm going to work with the upper body, I'm going to work with the lower body, I'm going to make sure I move the spine all the ways, you will overlap with other modalities, what their suggestions are, as long as you're approaching it from this like holistic, intelligent place. It's really remarkable, right? The body only does so many things. So what you've studied might have different language than what I've studied, but if we both understand what it is to create movement in the spine and like to move the pelvis into an anterior tilt and then into posterior, you know, a cat-cow is going to be great for so many things.
Right.
You know, so.
But doing a million cat-cows when your baby is breech can also be a detriment too. Like you don't need to sit at home all day for hours on end doing cat-cow, but it is a practice to do maybe a couple a day and see how that feels in your body and to encourage the baby to move. Yeah, I find that I run into this issue with sometimes with clients, just as a doula, helping people feel like they're safe in their bodies, but not trying to control the outcome of how their birth might unfold or how their labor might start, you know.
Totally. And I think on that note, one thing that I deal with a lot is when people, they don't feel like they have agency about what they can and can't do movement-wise. There's a lot of fear.
Well, yeah, especially if they have a doctor who's like, just come in and I'll do all the lab work, or I'll check your vitals and I'll tell you if you're doing well.
Yeah.
Like, you know.
Right, and it's so much more, there is so much more depth to the conversation that's necessary. And one thing, like one example is rotation. There are some people who are like, oh my God, you're pregnant, don't twist. It's like, okay, well, what if you're on your second kid and your toddler needs to be picked up and, you know, you're pregnant? Like, you're not going to twist to the right to pick up your kid? Like, absolutely not. Like, there's no way that we evolved as human beings that we couldn't, you know. And should you, like, be in a pretzel and, like, hooking your elbow outside your knee while you're pregnant and then, like, doing a prayer twist? No. Should you, like, stand up tall and twist open to the right and open your chest? Yes. You know, like these movements can be so healing and wonderful. And yet there's this fear, like you're saying, from the doctor or from like other medical texts that are very male focused, you know, and so they're just, as you and I have talked about many times, there's just less focus globally, right? Like, and medically on the female body. And so as this is something that mostly women are dealing with, then there's just not much to go off of. And so there's so many tools, I think, available that we just need to hopefully bring to the masses so people understand, oh, like, you actually can do this.
Yeah.
And it's empowering.
That.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. And even what you were saying about focusing and examining the breath in your classes, I find that in my prenatal classes or my sessions with clients, I always talk about different ways to breathe, because breathing is a way to expand and create space in the uterus, but it's also a way to release control again. And like, for example, there's a big difference between nostril breathing and mouth breathing.
Yeah.
In labor, we don't really want to be breathing through the nostrils because that has a tendency to be up in the head, in the mind, controlling the input and the output of the breath. And in labor, we want to release it all. We don't want to control the breath. We just want it to exit the body.
Yeah. I mean, there's
super
so many impacts. I think of the breath, releasing control is a big one, releasing fear. There's so much that comes up during pregnancy, whether it's like stress about how the birth's going to go, stress about finances, stress about, oh, I'm not sleeping already, and it's like the baby isn't, and it's like all of these things impact us and they live in our body. And
also just the anxiety of not knowing.
Yeah.
That's totally huge. How can we live in our bodies with this big unknown?
Yeah. One of my favorite teachings is that if you can connect to one piece of the body, you can connect to the whole, because each of the pieces are you, so the pieces of the body are the whole body. And so that might mean like we're asymmetrical, right? Symmetry is a fallacy in the body. It just doesn't exist. Well,
right? Even the pelvis.
Right? Look at the organs, right? The bones exist to protect the organs, right? They are the internal architecture, brilliant internal architecture. But we have two lungs, right? We have a left side and right side. The left side has 2 lobes. The right side has 3 to make space for the heart, right? And then we have 2 kidneys, right? But one's a little higher than the other because the liver's on the right side. So the one on the kidney on the right is going to be lower. Generally, some people's organs are flipped, which is wild. But
right.
The bone structures mirrors that of the organs, right? So they're protecting these internal systems. And so the bone structure is inherently asymmetrical. That's just how it is. Like, that is perfect. And what we, that's just, bodies just develop the way they do, right? Whether you have scoliosis or not, right? And so it's just interesting how, I don't know, this need for symmetry is like, and perfection, right? It gets tied up with control and wanting things to feel the same, all those things. Yeah.
So, okay, let's talk a little bit about postpartum and the postpartum body, supporting the postpartum body physically. But I'm wondering how you may support clients through postpartum emotionally or mentally in your classes in terms of body awareness, body consciousness, and the change that they are experiencing where it might feel a little bit foreign to them.
Yeah, I think in so many regards, it's like you have a new body. It's been through this experience, whether it's a cesarean birth or a vaginal birth, it is a different body. And so
I love that you just said cesarean birth because it is a birth.
It is a birth. Yeah, I got that from a podcast I listened to maybe 6 to 7 years ago, and it just stayed with me. All birth is birth, and
all birth is natural.
Yes, absolutely. So, and even clients who have had a cesarean, even if they say C-section, I'll just usually say cesarean birth back. And it's sometimes they impacted by it and sometimes they don't even notice. And you know what? It's just a choice that I've made to honor both, all types of birth. And so sometimes there's a lot, with, like you're saying, emotional. And again, I try to be clear on like scope of practice of like, I'm here for the person, but not taking it on. As someone who is quite sensitive and empathic, I need to be conscious of that.
Yeah.
But that said, this work is intimate. And so we're dealing with people's bodies and it just, stuff comes up and how to hold space for that. Similar to prenatal Pilates practice, like there's a lot of focus on the posterior chain, the back of the body. And there's a lot of focus on, unlike pregnancy, a lot of focus on reconnecting with the abdominals, right? We're rebuilding these neurological pathways to a part of the body that hasn't been engaged with muscularly in the same way for 9 months, right? It took a long time to grow this baby. It's going to take some time to heal. Birth is traumatic for the body. So to heal from it and rebuild takes time. And so I thankfully have had lately, like the last few years, my clients that have been postpartum have been quite patient. Like I haven't had like in all the textbooks or like different stories, and it's like, I want to run a marathon. It's like, I personally haven't dealt with that right away. And so,
oh my gosh. Yeah. I have clients that are like, they're holding their baby. They just had their baby like 2 days ago. And they're like, so when can I start running again?
Yeah.
And I'm like, whoa.
Let's start with a walk. Maybe
Or
like in
how
the room.
about, no, let's not start with any walking or running. Let's start with resting and bonding first and foremost,
Before anything.
And healing.
The walking is actually a really beautiful healing thing. So like once you're, able to, and it could be a really beautiful bonding experience, I think, to walk with your baby.
Absolutely.
Short walks. We're talking around the block max, not a 6-mile walk.
But also not if you're hours or a couple days postpartum.
No.
Like that's a time for rest and healing. But
yes,
when you feel like you've gained more energy, when you've crossed that threshold of like the initial high of birth, you've come down from it, you've gotten rest, you have support in your home, whether it's family or friends or a postpartum doula or a night nurse or whatever, then you can start like moving and engaging the body again. But so
by the time I'm working with someone, it's generally past the 6-week point. Like there are ways to stretch and move and gently engage before like you're cleared for exercise. I'm generally not taking someone on the equipment anytime before that.
So 6 weeks.
Well,
roughly, give or take.
Right? Like that's such an arbitrary number. I mean, like some women haven't stopped bleeding then. So let's make sure that's stopped before you're coming in. When someone comes back into the studio though, and this is something I repeat all the time, that the integrity of the movement is the focus, not the range of motion. Right? Our priority is the integrity. I don't care how big the movement is. So if we were talking about like feet and straps, leg circles, which a lot of people like, who cares how big they are? I mean, especially postpartum, like the inner thighs, the pelvic floor, like everything does not need to be stretched past a healthy range, right? So, and there's still relaxant in the system, right? So we don't need to go into that flexibility. Instead, maintaining a smaller range with a little bit more integrity and support will actually be more beneficial.
Yeah. Better in the long run. So if someone walks through your front door and is like, I just had a baby, I want to take a Pilates class, do you have sort of like do you ask them a couple questions about if they're really truly prepared to move again, or what do you say?
I usually chat with them, and like ask them like how it's been going, how they're feeling. If they bring up some stuff that feels really unique to them, that's just pretty challenging, I generally will suggest not coming to a class and instead coming to a one-on-one where we can be a lot more, just focused and just customize the work so that if it needs to be toned down, that it's not feeling like, okay, you do this, everyone else do this in the class, even though it's just 3 people. Sometimes it feels really good when that happens in a class where it's like, okay, Keely, I'm going to put you on this. And like everyone else, like you guys keep going with it. Like it feels like, oh, you're taking care of me. You kind of have to read the room a little. Like some people really like that attention and some people their feelings get hurt. Yeah. Or their ego gets hurt, right?
Yeah.
So, the nature of a group of 3 people is that I'm tweaking it for everyone though. So it's not usually like, okay, Keely this, and then everyone else, it's more like Keely this, person 2 this, person 3 this. And so it just feels like you're getting a lot of attention. But yeah, we definitely talk through what's going on and I kind of see what they bring up, and then I'll ask some more questions about what their healing journey has been so far, what their movement history was pre-baby, those kind of things.
I love that. You had mentioned earlier on that there's another offering at Sapphire Pilates, one-on-one Ayurvedic sessions. Can you speak a little bit about that? I know that your mom, Lily, is involved here. Does she take on prenatal or postpartum clients? And
yes.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So my mom, Lily, is an Ayurvedic practitioner. She's been studying Ayurveda for about 9 years, and we have a little office and at the studio, and she's able to work with people one-on-one. And we also do workshops at the studio, like Ayurvedic chats, basically, where it's like a 90-minute conversation. You can ask questions for sure, but we did one on the transition to spring, and we're doing one coming up on just an intro to Ayurveda. But she loves the work of working with prenatal and also postpartum. I think there are ways to eat and whether it's other lifestyle practices like oil massage or anything that can be really beneficial.
Or like just temperature of foods, like heat.
Absolutely.
We want warming foods.
Going over those things. Raw food is harder to digest. I mean, like so many people, women's digestion is impacted when they're pregnant and like dealing with gas and bloating and like all those things. There are
even
ways,
if they're not pregnant.
Right, totally. Just all people. All these things. I mean, there are little tweaks like that are really great, but there's also some, maybe she'll basically look at what you eat and like how you're sleeping, those kind of things, really comprehensive in terms of what's going on in the woman's life and seeing what are some ways that you can eat, change your diet, change your lifestyle practice that are more nourishing and more nurturing so that you feel balanced, that you feel like you have more energy. This is for everyone, pregnant or not, that if you are really sleepy after you're eating, that usually means you didn't digest your food well. So maybe you need to use more pepper or like some sort of spice that helps you break it down, or maybe you need some ginger tea or like,
or a digestive enzyme or whatever.
Right. Totally. Yeah. There's different herbs that she knows that are wonderful supports.
I love that. Maybe I need to interview her on the podcast.
Great. She would love it.
So how does your philosophy on movement differ from some of the other studios that you have been to or know about, either locally in Los Angeles or in other places?
Yeah, that's interesting. Again, Pilates is having a moment. It's super trendy. And I think there really is a time and place for these group classes that are, 6 on the smaller side, but 8, 10, 12 people on a reformer. I really wanted to offer something that's the antithesis to that, in the sense that that group class with 12 people is appropriate for a healthy young body. Someone in their 20s, 30s who knows how to move. In some situations, you might have someone who's new to Pilates who feels comfortable and like can kind of get the basics, but it's very challenging to get into detail when there's 12 people. And as a teacher, I am an experienced teacher in a sense, right? I've been teaching over a decade. I can teach. I am capable of teaching a lot of people at once. But when it comes to what I choose to teach and what I want to do, it's not that. For a mat class, I love it. I think the energy in the room feels good. I think you can really have a safe class when it's just the mat. But when you are talking about a piece of equipment that you really can injure yourself on if you don't know how to use it properly, I just don't think it's worth the risk of having that many people. It's also a ton of work. My nature is I know it's not possible. When I teach a group class, I want to give everyone just as much attention as I would give them in a private. So my friend has joked that it's like, when I teach, it's like whack-a-mole. I'm just like running from person to person, like helping them, and I'm giving them adjustments and tweaking where their pelvis is, tweaking where their shoulders are, and so that they can get the most out of the movement and most muscle engagement, most efficient engagement, etc. And so that, there is no way to have your eyes on everyone if there's 12 people. And also the tendency with group classes now is everyone's getting really creative. And I say that like with quotation marks. And this idea of creativity has, I think, taken a turn from, it's so far removed from what the essence of the exercise was that it's like a riff of the exercise, but some of the teachers don't even know where the exercise originally came from or what exercise originally was the source of that movement that they're teaching. And so I don't teach classically. I don't teach the way that Joseph Pilates taught. I am a contemporary teacher. That said, I have a knowledge and understanding of what the lineage of the practice is. And so my teaching is rooted in the work of Pilates while also having all these other influences. And so the creativity thing, I think, has gone so far that it's the safety issue comes up, like having people stand on the reformers in weird ways. Like people fall in classes, and it's like, I hear, because I teach teacher trainings, people will tell me when they're in a class, like, oh, someone fell, and we'll talk about how the teacher handled it. It's hard to handle it well, like, when people are trying to prioritize the flow of a class, and well, you kind of have to disrupt the flow of the class and make sure that person's okay.
Right.
And so this idea of creativity, I think, has to have a boundary or some sort of limit to it, that you're not being so creative that you've lost the principles of Pilates, whether that's connection to the breath. I mean, I can't tell you how many group classes I've gone to just in this city where there's not a single breath cue, which is astounding.
Wow.
Yeah, astounding, right? Like, how do you teach a mind-body practice? It's something like Pilates that is so intrinsically related to the breath without teaching the breath. And so another thing that I've seen a lot is if we look at the movement of the spine, it moves forward into flexion, backwards extension, side to side, lateral flexion, or it can rotate. So I think it's important to move the spine in all of the directions in a class. Every class, there's no reason why in a 50-minute, 55-minute class, unless you're working with someone on an injury, different situation. But even if you're teaching a targeted class, like I know there's studios that do like glutes and abs, ass and abs class. But
I just did that the other day at Barry's.
There you go. Right. And even in a class like that, you still want the full body to get some sort of attention, right? And there's certain exercises, if you think of like a plank, which are beautiful in the sense that their shoulders are stabilizing, the legs are working. Yes, the core is. Yes, you know what I mean? And so there's ways to do movement in a class, like to move the spine in a way that feels intentional and that everything is being addressed without it feeling like certain parts are being neglected. And so the thing that I've been noticing is that a lot of teachers either skip back extension completely, which is wild since we sit at desks and, round our chest. Right.
Yeah.
Which that's not the biggest issue actually I see in bodies. I see a lot of people with it, their pelvis, tilted back, like in an anterior tilt, and their hip flexors are tight, and then they're actually in a back bend. But we want to teach healthy spinal mechanics. And so it's something that's missing. And so that all of those things are super important to me when I look at who I'm hiring for as teachers, for example, and also when I'm teaching the teacher training, and just hoping that regardless of what direction someone wants to take their Pilates practice and teaching after they do a training here, that they understand the mechanics of the body, that they can safely and intelligently take the movement whatever direction they want. If they want to go more athletic, great. They want to go more nourishing and rehabilitative, great. There is a way to move the body and challenge the body and yet also be gentle. Gentle doesn't mean no work. Mm-hmm. Gentle doesn't have to mean easy. You can nurture and nourish the body and deeply engage the muscles, right? In a way that feels good for the nervous system, good for the muscles, So you walk out of a session feeling taller, not like, oh, I can't walk.
Yeah.
It's not aggressive. Yeah.
Well, I think that's just a testament to your philosophy and your practice, that you are more invested in quality over quantity, how many clients you get in your door, So amazing. I feel like this has been such an informative conversation about how to care for women in all walks of life, but specifically in pregnancy and postpartum. And your little studio is so beautiful and so sweet. And I can tell that you put in so much love and intention into this space. And I know that your clients can feel that coming in here. Yeah. And hopefully we can collaborate more in the future on supporting this demographic, and make sure everyone in the neighborhood, if you live in LA, if you're on the east side, please come to Sapphire Pilates. I think, are you going to do some online stuff too for the people that...
I'm hoping the mat classes first will be available online. Like, you can attend virtually as well. It's a bit of a one-woman show at the moment, so everything is me. So everything's coming.
One step at a time.
One baby step at a time. But yes, I would love to do a workshop with you, and I can't wait. We'll get it on the calendar.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat. I'll make sure I'll include all of your information about who you are and where people can find you in the notes. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share with friends and family, and stay tuned for the next episode.